This week on Unpacked, we're focusing on and analyzing in detail 2 updates to stories I've previously covered this year. First up is the closure of Mountaintop Studios and their free-to-play game Spectre Divide, and after that, we'll be talking about the weird narrative around Assassin's Creed Shadows and how people somehow thought one game would save Ubisoft from its current troubles. A few months ago, I made the prediction in another episode of Unpacked that the free-to-play competitive shooter Spectre Divide from Mountaintop Studios would have a hard time succeeding in the long term despite being a solidly made game due to a lack of uniqueness and player interest. Unfortunately for the studio, that prediction has come to pass, and as of this month, the 70-person studio and its game are no more. They recently launched their first official season of Spectre Divide to try and draw players back in, and while they reported some good initial results, it wasn't enough to keep the studio and the game funded. Spectre Divide will officially be completely shut down within the next month, and any purchases made during Season 1 of the game will be refunded. Mountaintop Studios released a very heartfelt farewell statement that acknowledged the challenges the industry currently faces and the pride they took in their work. "We wanted to deliver something innovative and original in a crowded genre that would bring friends together around unforgettable moments," said Mountaintop Studios. "We shook up the format, created a fresh art style and universe, and partner with some of our heroes. All of us knew from the beginning that the odds were against us, but that's what we signed up for. It was never a surefire bet. We did it anyway." With all the respect and empathy in the world for the team making Spectre Divide, I just can't find a way to understand why you'd invest $60-something million into trying to compete with the behemoths of the industry like Valorant and Counter-Strike, and then essentially make the same game in the process with just a few unique features to separate them. Competition is good. It breeds innovation, and I want to see more of that. But Spectre Divide didn't feel like competition as much as it did imitation. And that's why when I made my first Unpacked video talking about the game, I didn't have much hope for its long-term success, especially as a free-to-play game that needs a steady player base to continue funding it through microtransactions. The other game that I mentioned in that video was Fragpunk, which is faring much better than Spectre Divide so far. And I expected as much because its card mechanic is at least a more unique innovation in the FPS space. Credit to Friends vs. Friends for doing it first though. That said, while it's novel for now, I do think Fragpunk is going to struggle to retain its player count long term. The list of launched and then canned free-to-play FPS games is almost endless at this point. Lawbreakers, Concord, X-Defiant, Hyperscape, Dead Drop, Paladin's development has been halted, and now Spectre Divide is added to that list alongside many, many more. Hell, I think it's only a matter of time before 2K announces Project Ethos is being cancelled. I bet you didn't even remember that was announced. There's been endless amounts of money thrown into the shooter scene and so many cancelled projects. It's mind-boggling to me that developers are still finding millions of dollars worth of funding to keep producing these competitive shooters that nobody seems to want in the first place, besides the people making them or influencers huffing their own farts about how they know how to make a better game. The money in the multiplayer scene right now for independent studios is not in the oversaturated competitive FPS market, but in fun and unique experiences that require a bit more thought than just pulling a trigger. Hardcore FPS games like Grey Zone Warfare, Ready or Not, SCP-5K, or Hell Let Loose that are focused on team play and more sandbox experiences. Co-op horror games like Phasmophobia, Demonologist, The Outlast Trials, and Nuclear Nightmare that have players working together to investigate and survive horror encounters. Goofy party games like Lethal Company, Repo, or Among Us that create clippable moments pretty much every time you load up the game. Just to name a few. There's all kinds of multiplayer games doing incredible sales numbers that offer unique gameplay and memorable moments that keep bringing players back. And none of these had budgets of millions upon millions of dollars or massive teams making them. It's actually shocking to me that major publishers and new startup studios with lots of funding haven't tried to jump on some of these trends and continue to focus almost exclusively on the first or third person shooter markets. Not that I want the major publishers to saturate the market for these types of games or anything, but the fact that we don't have a AAA version of Phasmophobia yet, a game that has sold over 22 million copies, kicked off a whole new genre of games, still isn't out of early access, and has hilariously terrible animations, is something I think about almost daily. That's all fine, by the way. I adore Phasmophobia and have gotten hundreds of hours of enjoyment from it. I also learned at GDC that up until 12 to 18 months ago, the game was pretty much developed by one guy. I never want to feel like I'm shitting on people's work. Making games is incredibly hard, and a lot of these games I just mentioned were surprise success stories. But they also had a better chance of succeeding by not trying to play in the market with some of the biggest franchises in the world, or pinning hopes on the free-to-play model to fund their existence. It's a little hard to not say "I told you so" as someone watching these stories play out over and over again. I think the competitive shooter scene is a cornered market at this point, and if you're going to try to break into it, you have to avoid the free-to-play market and build something that really has a unique identity and will appeal to audiences that want fun first, competitive second. I've seen time and time again games in the shooter space try to cater to influencers and the competitive market. I can't think of many times it has worked. There's enough stories out there now, and watching a company like 2K Games announce a game like Project Ethos with millions of dollars in funding behind it and a lavish marketing event filled by influencers, I have a pretty good idea of how that story will end. Assassin's Creed Shadows is finally here. Reviews have been mostly positive, player sentiment around the game is solid, and the Ubisoft social teams have definitely been having a bit of fun with the positivity surrounding it. Since launch, the game has reportedly reached over 3 million players and counting. Ubisoft and news outlets say it's the second biggest release in the franchise ever, right behind Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We don't know yet how many copies the game has actually sold, as Ubisoft hasn't made that data available. Despite the big release numbers, analysts are saying that the launch isn't the mega hit that Ubisoft needed to turn things around at the company, which, if you've been following the Ubisoft story, you probably already knew that. All the hand-wringing over player counts and sales for Assassin's Creed Shadows is pretty much moot at this point. I've said for multiple Unpacked videos that one game isn't going to be enough to change the current trajectory of Ubisoft. Pundits and outrage peddlers have been trying to sell the story for months that Ubisoft's entire future revolved around this game, and that has never been true. Is it important for the game to do well? Of course it is. But after the amount of cancellations and underperformance of big titles Ubisoft has faced over the last half-decade, one game release wasn't going to be its saving grace unless it pulled Grand Theft Auto 5 numbers. Ubisoft has already gone through restructuring phases, its stock price is the lowest it's ever been, and after Shadows, we really don't have a game plan for what's next in Ubisoft's lineup. For a publisher as big as Ubisoft, there needs to be consistency, and that hasn't been the case for a long time now. I think part of the reason the company has been mum on their upcoming release plans is because they're figuring out what the company will look like post-Shadows. What's going on with Far Cry 7, The Division 3, Beyond Good and Evil 2, Assassin's Creed Hex, the Black Flag remake, the now rebooted Far Cry multiplayer project, all of Ubisoft's big mobile projects. There's a lot of unknowns with Ubisoft right now, and they have to be extra careful about the timing of these announcements to make sure they're not running into delay after delay or even more cancellations. If they can pull everything together, that's a solid lineup of games, and for what it's worth, Ubisoft did make good on many of the promises they made last year. Assassin's Creed Shadows released on Steam, and is easily the most polished Ubisoft game I've played at release in some time. Either way, I'm pretty confident that the Ubisoft of today will look like a much different company before this year is out. Assassin's Creed Shadows is still, in my opinion, a massively overscoped game, and I don't think Ubisoft can continue making games like that in their current state. Do I think Ubisoft is going to cease to exist as a publisher? No, not at all. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, The Division, Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon, and more are all still major franchises in the gaming space. But I do think Ubisoft will be a smaller company in due time, with games that are more focused in scope. Will they get bought out, sell off some of their IPs or studios, or have to lay off a lot more people? I don't know those answers, obviously. But I won't be surprised when more changes are announced, and probably sooner than you think. As we were editing this video, Ubisoft announced the start of the big changes I was expecting to hear about. Maybe not this quickly. As of March 27th, Ubisoft is creating a new subsidiary with Tencent as a 25% stakeholder. This new subsidiary will be autonomous, have its own management team, and house 3 of Ubisoft's biggest franchises: Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. Tencent is investing 1.16 billion euros into the new subsidiary as part of the transaction, and Ubisoft reaffirmed its commitment to becoming a more agile company, which is corporate speak for more layoffs are most likely coming as Ubisoft continues to cut costs and downsize. With the creation of a dedicated subsidiary that will spearhead development for 3 of our largest franchises and the onboarding of Tencent as a minority investor, we are crystallizing the value of our assets, strengthening our balance sheet, and creating the best conditions for these franchises' long-term growth and success. With its dedicated and autonomous leadership team, it will focus on transforming these 3 brands into unique ecosystems, said the press release. This new subsidiary will release titles from these franchises as their own entity, providing Ubisoft with a royalty. Ubisoft itself is going to be focusing on the development of IPs like Ghost Recon, The Division, and whatever else they've got cooking, but aren't ready to talk about their plans just yet beyond that. I think the best comparison you can think of here is something like Embracer Group, which houses multiple publishers including PlayOn, Deep Silver, and others. Ubisoft seems to be heading in that direction, with the key difference being that they still have their own internal studios making games, whereas Embracer is just a holding company and doesn't actually make games. It's going to be an interesting rest of the year for Ubisoft. That's all I can say. I have a feeling that Ubisoft would most likely look to sell off some of their lower performing franchises, like Prince of Persia, Splinter Cell, and I highly doubt we'll be seeing anything about Beyond Good and Evil 2 anytime soon. And that's all for this week in Unpacked. Bit of a catch-up week for me having been at GDC last week, but next week we'll have the Switch 2 to talk about, finally. It's about to be Nintendo's world again, and we're just living in it.
This video is brought to you by Nord Current Labs and their upcoming game Chains of Freedom, a high-stakes turn-based tactics game inspired by classics like XCOM. The world has gone to hell and you're the only one who can save it. Command an elite military squad through perilous missions filled with danger, deceit, and moral dilemmas, the 3 tastiest flavors of intrigue. In order to unravel a complex plot involving a rogue scientist, mind control serums, and a government teetering on the edge of collapse, you'll need to be prepared. That's where your squad comes in. Sauté together a mirepoix of weapons, ranging from meat hooks and axes to flamethrowers and mortars. And don't forget to enhance your characters with unique abilities by mixing and matching biocrystals found in the world. Hell yeah, biocrystals, that's the umami of upgrades. I shouldn't write ads when I'm this hungry. Hungry for Chains of Freedom, which releases later this year on PC. So head on over to Steam right now to wishlist the game and start tasting that sweet, sweet intrigue.